You boys be quiet down there!
Valis is awesome. Whenever I'm looking for a solid platforming experience, I know I can always power up the Turbo Duo for some Valis 3 or 4. Or how about some Valis 3 on the Genesis/Mega Drive? Or of course Super Valis 4 on the SNES. Sure, they're not the greatest or most innovative games ever made or anything, but it's certainly a series filled with fun, classic platforming action. So, obviously, this is going to be the most fun and easy to make episode of PC88 Paradise yet, because today, I get to play Valis. The original version of Valis. Oh, please make it stop! Oh, what have I gotten myself into this time? All this and more in this episode of PC88 Paradise. Welcome back to PC88 Paradise, the series where we take a close look at classic games for the NEC PC88, the most popular Japanese PC series of the 1980s. The original Valis was released simultaneously for the PC88, Sharp X1, and the MSX in 1986. Since this is PC88 Paradise, we're going to be playing the PC88 version, of course. So, let's open this thing up. The case opens up backwards, Japanese book style. Inside we have the manual, which is in black and white, and is actually quite thin, but does include some concept art near the back. Next we have the Telenet Japan 1987 catalog, showing the games they were selling at the time. One side is dedicated completely to Valis, and on the other we have Albatross Tournament Golf, Final Zone Wolf, and American Truck. Ah, American Truck. I kind of wish I was playing that today instead. The floppy disks are contained in one of these Telenet-style vinyl sleeves attached to the inside of the case, and the game is contained on two 5-inch floppy disks. To start the game, you can just insert disc number 1 and then add the other later when prompted, or just go ahead and insert both discs and press power. The first thing we get is the Wolf Team Presents screen, which back in these days was always accompanied by this kind of ominous bell sound. Quite fitting considering how bad some of their earliest games were. I mean, have you seen Final Zone Wolf? But anyway, Wolf Team would later break off and become their own company. Valis was released when they were still just a development team within Telenet. They did release some pretty decent games later on, so apologies if it sounds like I'm being a little too hard on them. At the title screen, we get the classic theme music, the Phantasm Soldier Valis. The music is probably one of the better aspects of this game, composed by Shinobu Ogawa, who did the music for a lot of early Telenet games, including Valis 1 and 2. The tracks here established what Valis should sound like, and it was emulated by other composers in the later games. But I don't really care for the FM synth in Telenet's earlier games like this one. They're of course using the original monaural FM soundboard here, and the sounds used can be quite harsh on the ears. It hasn't aged well, and I wouldn't really recommend listening to it today, but to keep things in perspective, this was 1986, and the very idea of making lengthy and enjoyable soundtracks in Japanese PC games had really just barely started to take hold in the same year, with titles like Game Art's Sylphid and Falcom's Xanadu Scenario 2. If you want to hear more of Valis' soundtrack, you can press F5 for the sound test, which has a cool looking interface, by the way. To start the game, we can either press space for a new game or press enter for a loading start. Rolling start! The opening when you start the game is quite nice looking and well done. Valis stars Yuko, a typical high school girl, who has recurring dreams where someone is calling her name from far away. Just when she is thinking about that, she is joined by Reiko, a classmate who frequently teases and bullies Yuko. They have a bit of an odd exchange here, where Reiko has an umbrella out as she says it is about to start raining again. She explains that she has come to say goodbye to Yuko, though they may meet again in the near future. Yuko has no idea what Reiko is talking about, and wonders also if perhaps Reiko is the voice calling her in her dreams. And on that thought, the game just abruptly starts. May the Valis be with you. Oh, we are going to have some fun with the English in this game. There's no explanation for why Yuko suddenly has a sword or why she's being attacked by weird enemies, but anyway, she starts this first stage in the city wearing her high school uniform. one of the trigger buttons attacks, and despite the fact that there is a perfectly good second trigger button, it goes completely unused. This was before proper platformer controls had been firmly established, and up on the D-pad is used to jump. I can tell this is going to be fun already. So Valis is a game that's been in my PC-88 collection for a while. I've turned it on many times, but have always ended up turning it off right away in disgust. The controls are crap. It's difficult to see what's going on. The enemies and their shots are very hard to avoid, and when you pick up the first power-up, the music changes to a panicked-sounding BGM, like you're about to die, and soon after, you do. What is even going on here? And if you want to give it a second try, you first have to watch this lengthy game over screen with the game's credits, and then the opening again. To be fair, both are skippable using the spacebar and enter button respectively, but this is surprisingly hard to figure out. The skip buttons seem to only work when pressed at certain times. This game really needed a universal skip button that works reliably right away. Otherwise, until you figure it out, you're going to end up stupidly sitting through these long scenes like the game is mocking you, before you can finally try the first stage again. So, let's do this again. The jumping in this game is just so bad. You have no control over it once you leave the ground, and you so often end up stupidly jumping facing backwards, since it takes so long to turn around before you jump. There are 2 jump heights you can choose from depending on how long you hold the up button, but it will take practice to reliably execute the one you want. The high jump can get you into trouble, since you go so long without being able to control your trajectory, so you're going to want to use the low jump if you're just trying to reach a low platform. And if you thought getting knocked backwards in Castlevania or Ninja Gaiden was bad, then you have yet to experience true pain. Trying to climb up to any high area can feel like an exercise in futility, since the enemies will usually knock you back in some direction you don't want to go. And where the hell am I supposed to be going anyway? It's not like the later Valis games I know, where you just go forward until you get to the boss. Oh no. The stages in this game are mazes, where you can go left, right, up, or down. If you try just going forward, you'll find the stage seems to be repeating endlessly. And the power-ups in this game are the biggest mystery of all. What the hell is this? Ill-gotten goods never prosper. First of all, I'm pretty sure that sentence doesn't make sense. And second of all, what the hell? It's like a swarm of enemies just came to kill me all at once. What did I do wrong? I was just collecting power-ups so that I can maybe have a snowball's chance in hell of getting somewhere in this game. Hope springs eternal. No, it doesn't. All hope is lost.
Calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean.
Deep breath. I decided that I'm going to figure this game out this time. Otherwise, how am I going to make a proper video about it? So the first step to figuring any of this out is reading the manual, which is going to be hard if you can't read Japanese. There's no English version of this game, and even if you watch a playthrough of the game on YouTube, you probably won't be able to figure this one out. The first thing you need to know is this level indicator. You may have noticed that the meter labeled Valis seems to be your life, but when it runs out, you don't die, and you get a fresh one immediately. The level indicator is actually the number of Valis life meters you have in reserve. You can pick up these red gems that the enemies frequently drop in order to fill up the Valis meter and gradually raise your level. The level doesn't make you more powerful or anything, by the way, it's really just the number of life meters you have. So from the very beginning of the game, you might want to go around collecting red gems in order to raise your level, as long as you can collect them faster than the enemies can kill you. I find walking straight along the ground while shooting often works surprisingly well. If you're lucky, you may even find a good spot for farming. Next, remember those sword power-ups that seem to either drain your life or send a swarm of enemies at you? Those are your weapon power-ups, but they aren't free. It costs you a certain number of levels in order to collect them. For instance, when you collect this first one marked H, you'll get a projectile weapon, but your level will also be lowered by 3. If you collect it when you don't have enough levels, you'll get the Never Prosper message, and the enemies will come to quickly finish you off. There are a total of 6 different offensive weapon power-ups, but you'll never know how many levels are required to obtain each one without the manual. I had to keep it open in front of me while playing the game. The other thing you need to know are the defense power-ups. Again, you'll need the manual in order to figure out which ones are the best, but as you can see, these items actually improve your defense by quite a generous percentage, so you're definitely going to want to collect these. Also displayed prominently in the HUD is the Phantasm Jewelry. It says in the manual that you collect one of these each time you defeat a boss, and you need all of them to get a happy ending. There are 3 other remaining power-ups you can collect. Force of Valis, which just destroys all enemies currently on screen. Super Force of Valis, I guess that should be super, which is temporary invincibility. And Super Force of Vacanti, which temporarily makes all the enemies invincible. Obviously you don't want to collect this one. You've got to be very careful about which power-ups you do and don't collect. You don't want to collect an offensive or defensive item worse than the one you already have, or you'll be downgraded. Worst of all, the offensive items still cost you levels every time, so you don't want to even collect the same weapon you already have. Easier said than done though, as the enemies will often knock you into power-ups you don't want. And the control in this game also makes it kind of hard to reliably jump over some of these, even with no enemies around. Even after figuring out the power-ups, I still couldn't figure out how to clear the first stage. There's a map of this stage in the manual, showing you just how vast it actually is. In order to make sense of this, you have to line them up horizontally. And the stage also repeats endlessly, by the way, but nothing is marked on this map. Where the hell is the boss? Well, there's one last thing to pay attention to in this HUD. Did you notice this arrow behind the level indicator? At first neither did I. This points you toward the boss, so if you keep traveling in the direction it shows, you should reach the boss eventually. So after several new games and being led by the arrow into the sewers, suddenly, there he was! I'll tell you, throughout this entire game, there's no moment happier than when you finally find a boss and get this flashing "Be careful" screen. Look before you leap? Why? This boss doesn't have anything to do with jumping. There's really no strategy to the bosses in this game. It's a game of stats. You just want to have plenty of levels accumulated so you can survive, and if possible, the best offensive and defensive items you can manage to arrive with. Just keep shooting and eventually he'll go down. Finishing a stage for the first time was really the big turning point for me. There are plenty of much harder stages left to come, of course, but this is when I knew this game was maybe actually possible to play. I had flashbacks to when I learned how to play E.T. on Atari 2600 and finished a stage for the first time. Actually, I think I'd rather be playing E.T. right now, not even joking. But anyway, I've got a game to play through here. Next to Act 2, Haste Makes Waste. Defender protection is gone. What this means is that you lose your defensive item at the end of each stage, though you get to keep everything else. Hell, you can even save your progress, including your current level and weapon. Your selection, return to save, space to no save. Your progress is saved on disc number 1 of the game. If you know how, you may want to make a backup of this disc rather than saving to the original one. I had a great time playing the second stage. It looks a lot like the first one, but at least the music is different. Knowing now how to play the game, I had a pretty easy time finding a decent defensive weapon and a better offensive weapon too, before finding the boss, which was much easier this time. Nothing venture, nothing have. Yay, another stage down and we get the first cutscene of the game since the opening. Yuko is now transported to the dream world called Vanity, where she meets the Queen Valia. Valia explains that she's summoned Yuko to this world in order to make her the warrior of Valis, and that she must now travel to yet another alternate world called Vacanti to defeat the evil Rogulis. Yuko wants no part in any of this, and just wants to go home. Yeah, I wouldn't be very happy if I was suddenly selected to be in this horrible game either. But Valia changes Yuko's clothes and says that explaining anything more to her at this point is a waste of time. You're going to be the warrior of Valis, so just shut up. Here's your costume. So we're on to Act 3, the first stage in the world of Vanity, with a new look for Yuko. This is another stage I had a pretty easy time with. Spectre is coming. Cowards die often. Well, did you see that? Even when you can't move, you can still get hit. Anyway, another stage down, and it's on to Act 4, South Vanity. For the dream world, this looks kinda gloomy. This is the first stage where the BGM started to physically hurt my ears. Time to lower the volume and buckle up, cause this was the first stage since the first that really took me a while to get through. I don't even want better weapons and armor anymore, I just want to get to the boss and get it over with. Illusion Encount. Home is office. Wait, what? What does that even have to do with anything? Anyway, there's another cutscene after this stage where Yuko meets the end boss Rogulis for the first time, and learns that he intends to rule not only the dream world Vanity, but also the real world as well. Yuko then decides she must defeat him, and accepts her role as the Warrior of Valis for the first time. It's not time for the end boss yet though, and it's on to Act 5, the first stage taking place in the dark world of Vacanti. Oh god, it has the same horrible BGM as the last stage. Unfortunately, I had to listen to it for what seemed like forever, as I followed the arrow to wherever the hell it was taking me. These stages seem to not only repeat horizontally, but also vertically as well. Damn, this stage really has nothing anywhere. What the hell? Is it the boss? Warp here. You must be gonna ultimative saint. Why, I'll give you an ultimative. So this brings us to Act U2. These weird warp acts are like bonus stages. You're invincible through the whole thing, and there are weapon power-ups. Unfortunately, they're almost impossible to avoid, so you might end up with a worse weapon by the end. And even in a bonus stage, I almost found a way to lose. I accidentally picked up the best weapon in the game when my level wasn't high enough to pay for it. The enemies came after me like crazy as usual, but luckily I was still invincible, but taken all the way down to level 0. The music changed over to the panicked almost dead BGM. Then I really screwed up by picking up another weapon I couldn't jump over. This seems to have just messed up the game completely, turning the screen blue and black. Then picking up a life power-up after that seems to have changed the music and color back to normal, but also changed my invincibility to be temporary, and it wore off. Luckily I was at the exit to the bonus stage at this point and managed to escape, even with all the enemies still chasing after me for picking up those ill-gotten weapons. That bonus stage was a close call. Finishing a bonus stage takes you immediately to the next stage after the one you were working on, without fighting the boss. So now I'm on Act 6, another stage that took me quite a while to get through. Spectre is coming? That's just the Act 3 boss repeated again. Before the next stage is another cutscene, where we finally meet up with Reiko again, and learn that she's been chosen as the champion of the bad guys. So she's Yuko's arch-rival, I guess? We don't get to fight her yet though, it's time for Act 7. This is the stage where I finally figured out you can pause the game with the stop key on the keyboard. This isn't listed in the manual, and I've never seen a game that uses this key to pause before. It's usually escape. But this is great, finally being able to stop the action when I need to look at the manual. This stage took forever. Come on, Arrow, where the hell are we going? I began strongly suspecting that the arrow was taking me for a ride. There's no way this is the fastest way through this stage. Once you find this weird clipped off part in the background, you'll know you're almost there. Gur is coming? Haha, looks like Rodan from Godzilla. Defeat him and... what does this say? Hit your wagon to a start. What? Anyway, it's time for Act 8. This stage wasn't too bad, but it requires a lot of platforming to reach high places, while you get constantly knocked around the screen. Get knocked off a platform and it's going to be a long way down as you helplessly watch your character fall. The boss of this stage is Reiko, Salo Ensure. Defeat her and of course we get a cutscene. Let's put a spoiler warning here for anyone who hasn't played the much better remakes of this game for the Mega Drive or PC Engine and doesn't want to know what happens to Reiko. Reiko explains her tragic backstory, how she didn't have any friends and never got along with her family. The two of them make amends before Reiko dies. I love how the game doesn't hesitate to kill off a major character. Despite how simple the stories can be, one thing I've always loved about the Valis series is how it never shies away from mature and dark themes, like the fact Yuko never wanted any part of this, and her ultimate fate later in the series. The world of Valis is a harsh one, where nothing is ever sugar-coated. Now we have only the last two stages taking place in Roguelus's castle. On stage 9, I confirmed just how untrustworthy that arrow can be. Here it's literally just telling me to keep going down forever. This isn't right. In some stages I'm willing to bet you could find your way faster by just ignoring the arrow. This is one of the stages where I ended up finding the warp instead of fighting the boss. Anyway, after the bonus stage, it's on to the final stage, Act 10. This game isn't done being hard yet. In this stage, you're basically just climbing upward to the end boss. Just to make sure you guys understand what playing most of this game is really like, here's some sped up footage. Get up there! Just get the hell up there already! Good lord. Finally, Roguelus is coming. Take a Valis. But if I take one, how do I know there'll be enough left for everyone else? Also, I know it spells his name Loglis here, but I've been calling him Roglis just because that's how they spell it in most of the English Valis games. And I definitely understand calling him Rogles, by the way, but it's Roglis. Anyway, defeat him and all is well that ends well by Wolf Team. Oh no, Wolf Team, don't try to pull that. All is not well just because I managed to finish your game. Anyway, we get the ending and there isn't much to talk about here. Valia alluded to this earlier in the game, but Roglis supposedly came to power due to the evil that exists in the hearts of humans, or some crap like that. As long as there's darkness in people's hearts, there will be evil like Roglis, but as long as humans have hope, there will always be the power of Valis to save them. The credits flash by quickly, giving it the feeling of the end of an old TV show or something. It looks pretty cool, I think, and besides, if you want to have a better look at the credits, there's always the game over screen anyway. By the way, this game over screen is what's often referred to as the bad ending. Though it says in the manual that you need all the Phantasm jewelry in order to get a happy ending, this is bullshit. The ending is identical whether you have all the jewelry or not. Now quickly, let's look at a few secret codes for the game. To get a stage select, at the title screen turn the Kana key to on, then press right shift, plus Q, Z, and I simultaneously. Next, if you press the help key anytime during a stage, you'll become temporarily invincible, but this can only be used once per stage. Finally, in order to get the best weapon instantly, anytime during the game, turn the Kana key to on, then press TUQ and the @ sign simultaneously. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, there were two other versions of Valis 1 released simultaneously with the PC-88 version. First, let's start with one of the PC-88's longtime competitors, the Sharp X1. This version is probably the closest to the PC-88 version overall, but runs maybe a little smoother. You also get to hear a very different FM sound version of the soundtrack, courtesy of the X1's YM2151 sound chip, with stereo sound. However, for some reason you can't run and attack at the same time in this version, and that practically ruins the game in my opinion. The other version released simultaneously was for the MSX. The MSX was considered to be a budget PC, and in this game it shows. Valis for MSX was released on a cartridge, and features far simpler graphics. The gameplay is pretty much the same frustrating mess though. This version replaced the high jump with the double jump. It's not the good kind of double jump though, it's the same as the high jump in the other versions, just performed by pressing up twice with the right timing. This version has a password system instead of a save feature, and they also removed all the cutscenes, so there's no story at all. Wow, the best part of the game is gone! It's also missing half the stages for a total of only 5, so at least you won't have to suffer quite as long in order to finish it. The PC-88's other main competitor, the Fujitsu FM7, didn't get a version until a few months later. Specifically, this version is for the FM77AV, one of the later, souped-up models of the FM7. The music sounds pretty different, despite the fact that this PC has the same sound chip as the PC-88. While the cutscenes look the same, the in-game graphics are a bit simpler in this one than on the PC-88 and X1. You can see, for instance, that Yuko's eye is just a single black dot. But perhaps thanks to that compromise, it runs pretty smoothly. The rules have also been changed slightly here, with the power-ups dropped by the enemies spawning from the top of the screen. And unlike the PC-88 version, there can be more than one on screen at once, making it easier to raise your level. And instead of punishing you for collecting weapons you can't afford, it simply doesn't allow you to pick them up at all. Nice. Best of all, you can change direction mid-jump. Holy shit. I also noticed the screen can scroll during the bosses, which makes the boss battles a lot more dynamic, with plenty of movement around the screen. The only real downside to this version I can see besides the graphics is that it really lets you take hits in rapid succession, even more than the other versions, which can make it really difficult at times. The English has been rewritten to be somehow even worse than the previous versions. Look before your leak? Oh man. The PC-98 version came out a month after that. This one has most of the improvements of the FM77AV version, except you can't change your trajectory mid-jump. The graphics aren't dumbed down, and it doesn't let you take damage in rapid succession as quickly as the FM77AV version, so it's the easiest, smoothest, and best looking version yet. I still think it's a terrible game though. You get tossed around by the enemies like a rag doll, just like in the other versions. The music sounds identical to the PC-88 version, though some of the stage BGMs have been switched around for some reason. So deciding which version to recommend is kind of a toss-up. If you're most interested in the music, go for the X1 version with its stereo sound. If you want better control, go for the FM77AV version with its controllable jump. Overall though, I would say the PC-98 version is probably the best compromise between graphics and playability. So that's all the true versions of the original Valis. All the other versions are so different I would call them remakes rather than ports. The first of which is the Nintendo Famicom version. This one's a completely different game with roughly the same story. Sort of an action RPG, featuring equipment and non-linear stages, with doorways and passageways to enter in order to find your way forward. The game was generally poorly received for its overly confusing stage design. Still, the core gameplay is far more competent here, and if you want to play it, there is an English patch. It also has some decent Famicom renditions of the original soundtrack. Who doesn't love NES chiptunes? But what if, say, you want to experience the story of Valis 1, while playing something that more closely resembles the good Valis games? Well, then you want to play one of the remakes on either the Genesis/Mega Drive or PC Engine. To be fair, these are definitely not the best Valis games out there either, but they're far more enjoyable and easy to finish than the original PC versions. They were actually some of the last Valis games to be released on the 16-bit consoles. Play the Genesis version for English, or the PC Engine version for different stage layouts, voiced cutscenes, and a CD arrangement of the original Valis soundtrack. And just to be extra thorough, I'll mention that there was yet another remake of the game for Japanese flip phones in 2005, and I'll also clarify that while there is a game called Super Valis for the Super Famicom, it isn't a remake of Valis 1. It's the same game known as Super Valis 4 on the SNES. In my opinion, the first two Valis games for PC are really all about the cutscenes, which were quite impressive for their time. Keep in mind this was 2 years before Ninja Gaiden on the NES. The story and characters are what drew players to the series. And of course, having a cute girl as the protagonist probably didn't hurt much either. It's very hard to see what's going on, and you end up just getting tossed around everywhere, making for quite a stress-inducing experience. The leveling system basically gives you a giant life bar, leaving the real challenge to trying to reach certain platforms or finding the bosses. Making a platformer with 4-directional scrolling was too tall an order for the PC-88 in 1986. 3 years later, Ys-3 would manage to pull it off a bit more competently. So indeed, the original Valis is a terrible game, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. But I think the more interesting question is this game a classic? This question cuts to the very core of what makes a classic a classic. Valis 1 was among the best-known PC games in Japan in the 80s. Lots of PC owners bought it, and there were plenty of fans who fell in love with the story and characters, causing it to spawn a relatively long-running series. And though the sound of the music in the original versions may not have aged well, the title screen and Stage 1 themes are etched into the memories of those who played any of the earlier versions, or even the remakes of the game. So can something be considered classic while still being terrible? Is the Yugo a classic car? Is the Shag's Philosophy of the World a classic rock album? Is Valis a classic game? I'm going to go ahead and reluctantly say yes. Thanks for watching this episode of PC-88 Paradise. Please remember to like and subscribe, and a special thanks as always goes out to my supporters on Patreon. You're what allows me to keep making these videos. So until next time, this has been Mr. Jakes, saying thank you and see you again.